Afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for joining our weekly live stream. This is our weekly podcast interview where we talk about all things related to digital transformation. And this podcast interview is being filmed for the Transformation Ground Control podcast. So if you're interested in digital transformation, you're looking for a tech agnostic, independent, objective view of digital transformations, be sure to check out transformationgroundcontrol.com. We have almost 200 episodes now. You can go back and watch any of the past episodes there, transformationgroundcontrol.com. We have new episodes every Wednesday that are released. And today's conversation is a live conversation. So you're part of the live production of our podcast by being here today. So thank you for joining. We are today going to talk about keys to successful ERP implementations. I'm excited for our guest here today who I've never interviewed before. So it'll be his first time here together with me. And I'll introduce him in just a moment. We're going to talk about keys to successful ERP implementations. But before we jump into the questions that I have for our guest, and before I introduce our guest, just a couple logistical things. I mentioned that this is a live podcast format. So any questions you have, I encourage you to please answer those or ask those questions. And my guest and I will get to those questions here as we get going in the conversation here today. We're watching the chat across all the platforms we're streaming to. We're streaming to YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and X, as well as Twitch. So wherever you're watching or listening, thanks for being here. And please use the chat feature in your platform to ask questions. And speaking of the chat feature, if you don't mind just dropping in the chat now, where in the world are you joining from? We tend to appeal to a global audience. I'd love to hear what city and country are you joining from today, just to understand where you're all joining from here today. So my name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and I'm the host of the Transformation Ground Control podcast. I mentioned CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients through the world with their digital transformation journeys. We help them with digital strategy and software selection, implementation readiness, as well as implementation PMO and program management. So those are just some of the services we provide. And joining me to discuss this topic of keys to successful ERP implementations is Alec Epstein, who is the CEO and founder of a company called Bryant Park Consulting. So Alec, thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here. And there's a couple different angles we're going to cover here today. As far as ERP implementations, obviously, we want to talk about ERP implementations, what makes them successful, why do so many of them fail, sort of get your perspective on that whole thread. But before we jump into those questions, tell us a little bit about yourself and about Bryant Park Consulting, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So my name is Alec Epstein. I'm the founder and CEO of Bryant Park Consulting. I've been in the NetSuite consulting ecosystem or ERP consulting ecosystem for my entire career. Began my career in-house at NetSuite when it was an independent company prior to its acquisition by Oracle. I was there through the transition as part of their professional services organization doing implementation work, then moved into the partner consulting ecosystem around that product and around the Oracle NetSuite ecosystem to help sort of organizations grow and transform on the platform. I eventually started Bryant Park Consulting. We're a leader in NetSuite transformation, ERP transformation writ large. And we support a kind of a broad set of services and technology platforms that help an organization go from legacy to modern capabilities and platforms. We've got about 150 employees, mostly in North America, but across the world. And we work with organizations in varying shape and size across industries. Been in business for about 4 years and work really closely with a lot of organizations like yourself, Eric, kind of post selection, during the selection process of an ERP implementation, during the implementation, after implementation. And so I'm sure you and I will be able to share a lot as it relates to success stories and how to be more successful.
Yeah, some of our battle wounds from having done this for so long. So before I jump into the ERP related stuff, you have a pretty fascinating backstory as far as you mentioned a little bit about the company. You've got 150 people, but tell us about when you started the company and the growth trajectory you're on, because that's an impressive story.
Yeah. Like I mentioned, I was an implementation consultant and eventually grew to lead consulting teams in transformation work. What I noticed in the consulting ecosystem or the mid-market consulting ecosystem that I was a part of is that as mid-market organizations started to adopt more and more complex technology and cloud-based ERP solutions started coming and becoming more broadly adopted in the mid-market, that kind of created a vacuum of opportunity for mid-market specific consulting organizations. And we see a lot of larger legacy consulting providers coming into that space, sort of lacking the nimble agility necessary to be successful in many cases, and also I would say, struggling with fostering a successful work-life balance and sort of sane experience for consultants who are working day to day on these projects. Oftentimes where projects have smaller allocations, shorter durations, and there's a lot more to touch, so to say, a lot more context switching involved as a resource. And so I think those opportunities, sort of seeing that opportunity to build an organization from the ground up that sort of serviced this market in particular and was built around the people that were delivering the service and what was in their best interest over a long haul, thought was a big opportunity. So I wanted to start a firm that was sort of dedicated to that, the success of the consultant, and ultimately then the success of the customer. And so starting Bryant Park Consulting was an easy decision in that regard. I was very lucky very early on to get other people to join me as co-founders and leaders in the journey. Cassius Kellogg, my chief operating officer, I have to give him a big shout out, and many others. And we were lucky to have real rapid adoption and respect within the NetSuite ecosystem, which has ultimately helped us sort of fan wheel substantial growth in a short period of time. I think really, again, it goes back to focusing on, how we make the consultants successful, and that really resulting in growth thereafter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's been the biggest challenge you've had, growing that quickly and sort of carving out your own brand, your own name, your team's name? What are some of the biggest challenges you faced?
For me, individually, I'd say it's, my role transforming as the organization has grown, going from, a small team of a handful where you can sort of sit together in one meeting and everybody hears everything and everybody's aligned in strategy, to an organization now that requires, cascading meetings and communications in order to keep everyone aligned and moving in the same direction. That change has been one that has come rapidly for us, and something we've needed to mature maybe more quickly than other organizations, growing a little more slowly. So that's been a challenge. I think the things that have helped, like I mentioned earlier, finding and bringing on the best people, those people that can help to lead teams, motivate teams, train and enable other people. Those make a big difference and sort of serve as an extension of, myself and the culture and the organization. And I think in many regards, hiring those amazing people are kind of the only way to scale or grow in any pace, but certainly at a fast pace.
Yeah, that makes sense. That is a common challenge, like your role evolving, especially when it has to evolve that quickly from being a small handful of people to now 150 people, and how do you manage a larger team like that? So that's super interesting. But congratulations on all the growth. That's super exciting.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it.
So a couple of quick shout outs to the audience here today. Jonathan's joining from Montreal. Thanks for being here, Jonathan. Bailey joining from London, England. Thanks for joining today. Buggy on YouTube says, great content. And Buggy also says, literally a hidden gem on YouTube. So thank you for being here today, Buggy. And I appreciate that. And I look forward to hearing where everyone else is joining from here today. So I'm going to jump into my questions here about ERP implementation success, Alec, and we'll get the audience talking here soon as well with additional questions. But if we're sort of backing up here and just looking at the big picture, you're sort of consolidating, summarizing all your years and your team's experience with NetSuite implementations, ERP implementations in general. What do you think are some of the key factors that come to mind that are really those keys to success, and the things that successful ERP implementations do differently than the ones that struggle or fail?
Yeah, I would say that, we refer to them often as critical success factors, and we sort of try to codify them, learn as well from, the portfolio projects that we've gone through, to try and sort of simmer back and understand what went well, what didn't go well, and, sort of bring that together so that we can understand these, I'll say, principles or critical success factors more holistically. But the big ones I would say that stand out, executive commitment. So regardless of the size of the organization, you really do need sort of C-suite level buy-in and sort of commitment to the engagement. Where the project is going and the purpose for engaging in the project has to align to the organization's strategy. What is their 2-year, 3-year, 5-year plan, and how does this coincide with or facilitate that plan? The more aligned it is to the strategy, and the more invested in the project the executive leadership is and communicates themselves as, the more likely the whole organization is going to rally around the initiative holistically. And I think that's sort of fundamental. with that, I'd say also I'd encourage you positive energy, right? A positive leadership. These big transformation projects are like jarring in some cases for lots of folks, and people are wondering, what the change and impact is going to be for them. And at times, the folks on the project team themselves, and even the counterparts, third parties who are helping you in the process, right, can get downtrodden or concerned or stressed, right, regarding the weight of the project, the effort that's in front of them to get the project completed. And I think that positive leadership from the top is really critical to making sure that everybody stays sort of in line and moving towards success. I'm sure you've sort of can resonate with that as a big driver of overall success in a transformation.
Yeah. And so much other stuff stems from that too. So many other things that you need to be successful in a project stems from whether or not you have that executive level commitment and that positive leadership. If you don't have it, then it creates a lot of other issues that a lot of times get blamed for the implementation failure, but really it oftentimes comes back to what you're talking about here.
Right. Yeah. And I think the other, one of the other things sort of, commitment doesn't necessarily mean, you're spending 40 hours a week on the transformation itself, right? You also, so another critical success factor is having what we say is a small cross-functional team of your best people, right, running the project. And so, depending on the nature of your business, whether you cover different regions, different lines of business, maybe you have different subsidiaries that have grown through incubation or acquisition, the representation of a core project team should really be kind of the best of every, I'll say, intersection of those dimensions, right? The best procurement leader from each region, as an example, or the best procurement leader globally, and really having clear involvement from the folks that are leading the org, the best that know the organization the most, and giving them sort of delineated authority. I think that's super key as well, right? So empowering that small cross-functional team to get a lot done, maybe backfilling them so they have the capacity to really invest in the project. I think that's also a big driver. And if you have that executive level commitment and then this like core team that's got good authority and good allocation or capacity to work on the project, and really knows the business and is entrusted by the leadership, I think that sort of is the complementary effect that allows for the executive leadership to continue to run the business, continue to drive the project forward, but without needing to spend majority of their time in the engagement, so to say, day to day, and be successful still.
Yeah, it makes total sense. A couple of notes from the audience here. I want to say hello to Matt, who's joining from Montreal on LinkedIn. We also have Alejandro joining from Santiago, Chile. Every time I hear the word Santiago, I think of something about Mary. If you've ever seen that movie, there's some funny references to Santiago that we won't get into here. But if you're a fan of that movie, you'll know what I mean. Pranchu from Toronto, Canada. Thanks for being here today. And then Michael Chesson, I think he's someone you and I both know. He's in Atlanta. So thanks for joining here on LinkedIn today, Michael. He's kind of a legend in the industry as well. We'll have to have him on the show sometime. But for now, so thanks everyone for joining here today. Alec on LinkedIn says, thank you for sharing your thoughts. And then here's a question that I'm not 100% sure the angle here, but we'll see if we can unpack it a bit here, or at least take a first pass at it. And this is from Assad on LinkedIn. And Assad says, implementation should be recommended after an audit. What are your thoughts there? So maybe a way to reframe that, Alec, would be, what should you do to get ready for an implementation, or what are some of the prerequisites for successful implementation?
Yeah, I think, thoughtful planning and review of what you have in place is really key. So an audit, may serve in many cases as a mechanism to take a fine-tooth comb to the business and to your process to try and, uncover areas of opportunity for improvement. And oftentimes we will have customers come to us where, following an audit, some issue was uncovered, right? And the process to resolve, or one of the drivers for resolving that is, cost or reporting issues, et cetera. So in many cases, when an organization is facing challenges and they're uncovered in an audit, they may look to systems and technology to try and resolve some of the underlying causes of the fundamental problem that was resolved or identified in the audit, right? Reporting, accuracy, data integrity, controls, governance, et cetera. So it's definitely possible that, following an audit, or one might strongly recommend considering looking at optimizing or changing or improving systems in some capacity. Certainly, if you come out of an audit with a very good understanding of your processes and your data, et cetera, as a result of that, you may be in a good position to begin a transformation. So I wouldn't say that I disagree with the question or the ask there. Hopefully that gets to the point. I don't know, Eric, if you have any other thoughts on that.
It's just a good reminder of kind of the value of what a successful ERP implementation can do. It can put financial controls in place and more structured processes, repeatable processes. And a lot of it, so much of it is about scaling. And I imagine, dealing with the mid-market as much as you guys do, and dealing with higher growth companies and your customer base. I imagine that's a pretty big deal for them, make sure they can create that scalability and, repeatable processes and all that good stuff.
Right. I mean, a lot of, to your point, a lot of organizations that are in the growth stage may come to, a NetSuite transformation services provider like ourselves, or just to an organization like yourself, try and figure out or identify where they should go and what sorts of systems they should adopt so that they can be more ready to, be audited, right? And be successful in that process. It's definitely easier to audit an organization that's running on a system that, we'll say, has more robust capabilities and audit logging and those sorts of things, as compared to some of the smaller, say, accounting and business process packages or Excel, right, as an example.
Yeah, makes sense. And, you talked a little bit about executive commitment and leadership and how important that is to successful implementations. But what are some of the if we've sort of flipped that and asked the opposite question, what are some of the most common mistakes that you see clients make, or even if they don't make them, you sort of have to talk them off the ledge or sort of advise them and to go in a different direction? What are some of those common instincts that kind of lead project teams astray in these projects?
Yeah, that's great. Great question. One of the things that we see can happen in a project is that as you start to go deeper and deeper into each functional process area or step in a process, right, down to the state or transition between those states, et cetera, you start to uncover a lot of complexity or additional, nuanced scenarios that you may not have sort of encountered or expected to encounter. And in many cases, you don't encounter this because you're a business process owner who's not, say, doing that day to day, trying to guide the overall project, or you're a project manager internally trying to guide the project, and you're finding that, wow, there's a lot more complexity to this individual process than maybe we originally anticipated. Instead of a 2-hour meeting to have that discussion, we need 4 or 8, right, and so on. It's very common for this to happen, right? People tend to, and this is just part of life, where people tend to underestimate the complexity of what it is that they're getting into, or the overall project at large, and that's super common. What's important to do so that you don't experience, I'll say, extended fatigue or a sort of snowballing effect of requirements and scope, is to have strong scope management. I think one of the principles that you should employ, as you go through a transformation, right, is to try and narrow the scope as you go, right?
Mm-hmm.
As much as everybody wants to say, well, we've agreed to this being an outcome, and these are the outcomes that I want to achieve. Many cases, the same outcomes can be achieved in a more simple way. And you have to really fight as you go through the project to try and find things to actually remove from scope, or to try and simplify, as opposed to continue to allow for your commitment to stay unwavering as you identify more and more complexity. I think the reality is that complexity is going to arise. It's there. It's just not all written down in front of you just yet, because you haven't spent those 4 to 8 hours uncovering it. Yeah. So what you have to really try and fight to do as you go through the project is make a firm commitment and just have that sort of clarity to understand that the only way that if the scope of the project is becoming clearer and growing just by default because it's becoming clearer, what you have to do is try and narrow that scope as you go along, so that the team can actually still achieve that deadline, right? Without, burning themselves, to the ground, right? To do it. And so I think that mentality can be kind of scary for folks, especially when you're going into a transformation. You think, well, I really need to achieve this specific outcome. Reality is there's lots of ways to achieve an outcome, right? The target outcome of timely financial reporting, good governance and controls, strong process, certain SLAs for customer satisfaction or, on-time fulfillment, whatever it is. I think all of those things can still be achieved in many cases with a simpler approach to maybe what you initially anticipate. You challenge yourself to try to narrow the scope of the project as you go, right? I think that's sort of a good mentality to have. I think that without that mentality, the complexity naturally grows. So you actually have to be very intentional about trying to resist it. Otherwise, you'll end up in a situation where inevitably you end up with a much bigger snowball than you anticipated rolling down the hill. And if you tell the team, that no matter how much snow accumulates on that snowball, we have to get it done on this particular time frame, you're going to really stress out your organization, all the people, everybody who's involved in the process, instead of trying to kind of narrow that as you go through. So anyways, that's sort of a high level guiding principle, I would say, but definitely a challenge that we see is people being very, very firm and unwilling to revisit and renegotiate what a process is going to look like initially, or what that first launch is going to be. And instead, kind of they're squeezing themselves between a timeline and their team's capacity and mental sanity and those sorts of things. And that's not a place you want to be in, right? You want to have calm and clarity, happy team, ringing the success bell on time as expected. But ultimately because you've been thoughtful about narrowing the scope as you went along. And Eric, I'm sure you've come along where in the middle of a project, you do a lot of these, project middle of process not going well, you come in and help revive or resuscitate or whatever I don't know what your terminology is preferred, but I'm assuming some of the times you come along, you realize, wow, these people are really trying to take on too much. There's far too much complexity here. We need to kind of break this down into more sizable chunks and pieces, or we need to try and narrow this down and sort of keep it simple for an initial launch so you can get up and running on something and add to it thereafter.
I agree. And these projects are complex enough as it is. They're going to be complex no matter what. So there's no point in making it more complicated. You don't need help making these projects complicated. They're already complicated. So you might as well help yourself by sort of backing off and breaking up into smaller chunks, like you said.
Exactly.
And here's a great follow-up question from Alec on LinkedIn. And it sort of ties into what you were just talking about, Alec, around these workshops where you dive in and you start to understand the complexities. You start to get below the tip of the iceberg as it relates to your current processes and complexities and things you're trying to improve. But Alec asks along those lines, how and at what moment in time is this room for improvement of processes or organization management discovered and communicated? So in other words, like as you're going through this upfront design phase that you guys go through with your customers, you identify all these complexities and risks and challenges with the current processes, and then you define how it's going to look in the future. How do you, from a change management perspective, how do you start to communicate that, or what have you seen work better in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think from the first moments that you're engaging in the process of interacting with the third party who's advising you, whether that's in the sort of early exploration phases prior to making a directional selection of a platform or transformation or an initiative or direction altogether. And in a lot of those interactions, one thing that the team should first be trying to do is really understand your current state, your current processes. And I think in that understanding, oftentimes, your team also, it will come along, that understanding will also come along with a lot of, representations of pain points, and also sort of measures of performance, under those current processes, i.e. how fast are we doing something, at what rate of accuracy, et cetera. From there, you really start to kind of narrow in on things that are maybe the slowest, the least accurate, the least successful, or where the process is the most laborious, or taking the most time. So that kind of process review and process engineering exercise, a lot of folks like your organization, Eric, specialize in that type of work. And then you can really start to identify where there's areas of opportunity for improvement for your business specifically, for your business processes, and ultimately, start to map out where and how, there may be opportunities to improve with, be it additional technology, process change, something in between, or inclusive of both, personnel change, restructuring of your organization, all those sorts of things. So I'd say really at the earliest stages when we're going through process reengineering and design, in a transformation is where we start to evaluate and assess where there's, opportunity, where there's going to be change, what the impact would be, and then start to plan for how we, address those changes. And mitigate any risk related to pursuing those changes. I don't know, Eric,
Yeah.
if that gets at it or if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely true. I mean, you've got to first of all, I think the key is you talked about internal alignment, executive commitment, leadership, and all that stuff. You do need that's where the executive team comes in, as far as at least validating what you are willing to change and what what improvements and scope you're willing to take on during the project to make sure you find that right balance between wanting to keep things simple and not overly complex, but at the same time you don't want to just go in and put in NetSuite or any other ERP system that just automates what you've always done, because chances are you're trying to improve that. So finding that right balance, I think, is where a lot of companies get stuck, and they get tripped up, because it's like in the quest to want to improve processes, they make things too complex, or in the quest to make things less complex, they end up just automating what they've always done because it's a path of least resistance. People aren't going to complain if you don't change things. So it's a tricky balancing act for sure, but that's where that executive commitment comes in that you were talking about before.
Yeah, absolutely. I think oftentimes, in order to make something more scalable or sustainable, you do need to change something, and there's going to be some impact to it. That's, I think, one of the other critical success factors, Eric, is the openness to change, management of change, organizational change management. That aspect of the project is super key. And there's lots of specific examples where we almost see on almost every project, you need to really potentially reassess certain fundamental ways that you run the organization, right, and incentivize people. As an example, in an ERP transformation, you're defining how you do financial reporting. So, as an executive leadership team, how do you incentivize your department leaders? How do you incentivize your line of business leaders? Are they running on a GP or gross profit for their line of business? Are you building incentive structures around that? What sort of visibility and behavior are you trying to drive out of your leadership team? And how does that feed into the project? If there's any sorts of changes that you're hoping to make, or if you're hoping to enable your team to be able to get a better grip on the business, take more accountability for their P&L, as an example, those sorts of things, which many people are looking for an ERP transformation to help facilitate. I think it's important that you really you evaluate how you are going to overall change and communicate the change to all of those leaders, and possibly even consider changing incentives, right? Incentive structures. I mean, that's big change. If you're running a business, moving the cheese on your executive leadership team and trying to align them to new performance objectives is a very big change. I think that goes all the way down the line as well to folks that are managing things like pricing and cost on services and items, and salespeople being incentivized. How often do you come across an ERP transformation where you're tasked with trying to model their commission structure?
Right.
I mean, people come up with commission structures, predominantly in Excel. I mean, if you don't have a system in place today, you're just coming up with this stuff, and you're coming up with it from ideas. You're trying to influence behavior. And so it's almost always something very bespoke. And sure, you can go and get, commissions engines that can handle anything under the sun, and you can write anything custom in a report or a system for all intents and purposes. But if you don't want to completely kill yourself, you may want to just look at the capabilities of, say, a commission solution out of the box, or a module out of the box of a given ERP platform, and ask yourself, how can I achieve the same sort of incentives and behavior that I'm trying to drive, and the same sort of cash outlay on, incentive compensation or commissions, expense, but restructure it so that it just sits into the system a little bit more, nicely, or is a little bit more sensible and less, dynamic, right? I think those are scary. Those are scary lines to walk, right? Again, you don't want to go and restructure, your team's commissions very often, and you certainly would have to communicate to everybody why, it's beneficial to everyone, and not going to hurt, their upside, for example, or their incentives. But driving that change, it can be very, very helpful. I've seen organizations spend hundreds and hundreds of hours trying to achieve commissions transparency with super crazy commissions modules, where they could have probably achieved it in a dozen hours if they were willing to maybe change how they incentivize folks, and more often than not, probably have driven the same revenue outcomes or incentives and goals, performance out of their sales team that they were really looking for, right?
Yeah.
It's just scary stuff to touch, right? Incentives, commissions. Those are some of the scariest things to touch when it comes to a big project, right?
Yeah, I agree. Here's a question or just a point of clarification from Pranchu on LinkedIn. He says, by narrowing down the scope, do you mean phasing out scope? And I think that is one of two things you're suggesting. I think you were suggesting maybe either phasing out or reducing scope, or phasing it to where you're not doing it all at once. You're just breaking up into smaller chunks along the way. Is that the way you see it?
Very often, most projects will take place, or most transformations don't all happen in a single sort of start to finish project. And that's just if you think that for the next 20 years your company is only going to need to do one project, and 20 years from now you're still going to be successful, right?
And you're done.
It's very unrealistic, right? I mean, that, or you have an organization that's just very stable, you have no interest in making any changes, and you like that, in which case you probably have a very great lifestyle, and I'm envious of you in that regard. But I think the reality is that for most organizations, they continue to try and grow and innovate, and obviously they operate in a world where everything is changing, and so you have no choice but to grow and to innovate in order to stay competitive in no matter what industry you're in, right? And more so these days, it's technology that's driving it. So what you have to kind of realize is that this process of transformation, unfortunately, it's actually never going to end, right? It's just going to go on, and it's going to continue going on forever and ever and ever, whether you like it or not. If you're going to be in business, get used to investing in technology and advancing your capabilities and incorporating more and more technology for as long as you are in business. It's just going to be the way that you operate now. And what I like about these modern SaaS cloud environments is that it actually helps you get into a culture of innovation, right? Take NetSuite as an example. I'll kind of give them a little pitch here. I'm obviously very biased, but the reality is that every 6 months, everybody's getting a release, and that release is bringing you more and more capabilities powered by this enormous R&D budget of Oracle, right? Same sort of capabilities or model is happening across the world in all SaaS. And I think the reality is that for you as an organization to adopt those things, you have to get used to incorporating change biannually at a very minimum, right? Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're just going to let those things fly by. 4 years, 5 years later, you wouldn't have taken advantage of all these capabilities that they're providing to you for the same subscription costs in many cases you're already paying, right, for the software, and you're going to therefore not be as competitive as maybe other organizations that are a little bit more adept at incorporating that change, right, or incorporating those new capabilities. And so from my point of view, you kind of have to adopt this mindset of continuous innovation no matter what going forward. What better way to do it than jumping into a new ERP transformation and jumping into an ecosystem that helps you build that culture of continuous innovation and has really robust resources around it to help you sort of stay innovative over the long haul. So anyways, going back to the question, understanding all of that, you absolutely need to phase out your transformation, because guess what? You're going to have phases 2, 3, 4, 5, infinity forever in the future. So you may as well narrow the scope of what you're going to do first, so that it's consumable and achievable. So you can then replan, because a lot of people make great 5-year plans, but most organizations are reforecasting quarterly, biannually, because things change. And so too should your roadmap, should be revisited and reforecasted. And with that, you need to kind of make your work sort of smaller and get things done faster, not longer and slower. And so in this world, I think phasing is kind of the only way to be incredibly successful, or to really adopt technology successfully in your organization. I think it's super key.
Yeah. Yeah. No, on the flip side of that, though, I agree with everything you just said, but the risk of what you just described with the ongoing change, continuous improvement, never really having a finite finish line where you're quote unquote done with the implementation, you're done with your process work and all that stuff. I agree with that, but there is a dark side, which is change fatigue. And this is a good question from Timothy on LinkedIn. He says, how do you manage change fatigue? Changing both the system and the process can be overwhelming for people. Do you give them time in the new platform before you also force process changes on them? So how have you seen this unfold in your experience, Alec?
Yeah, I think the phasing really helps with this, right? You're changing less at a time, and you're doing it a bit more incrementally with a smaller subset of people where you can spend more time with them, right? I think that reduces the fatigue. In my experience, fatigue is not because of the amount of time spent. It's actually often because of sort of a lack of communication, right? And the frustration that results from that lack of communication. Most people who get very well trained often aren't experiencing change fatigue. So my experience is that by phasing, you'll definitely kind of minimize that fatigue. But certainly you got to be thoughtful about, the folks that you're engaging with, and how often you're changing their processes, right? And how substantial those processes are changing. So, you want to lay some good foundation, in your sort of systems landscape, whether that's your data architecture, your process, your organizational structure. Having a really good foundation is key. And then, this incremental change biannually or quarterly or whatever your release cycle is, so to say, thereafter, it should be small, controlled, changes that can be easily communicated and go through, good, I'll say, governance and communication, right? In our organization, as an example, we're really leaning into learning management systems and rolling out change to process and systems more often through a learning management system, right? That allows for us to sort of incrementally introduce change and make the change easy to access for people. I think those sorts of things can be really helpful as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And here's a follow-up comment from LinkedIn. It says, I get you have to adopt continuous innovation, but you need to have a culture of innovation or else you're going to set yourself up for friction. So I think it's kind of what you're alluding to, Alec, is you're sort of creating the process you just described is sort of creating that continuous improvement mentality, that culture of innovation, and by having these incremental ongoing phases. I mean, that's sort of what you're doing is you're embedding that into the culture of the organization.
I think so. And, likewise, this can be a big change for an organization, right? There's lots of companies that we collaborate with that, have been on an existing system platform with existing processes and personnel for a long time. And, are just now realizing that they are, losing market share as a result of a lack of competitiveness, or they're losing personnel to other companies where the day-to-day experience for an employee is superior from a system standpoint, which is realistically where 75% of your people are going to spend 80% of their time, right? Inside your systems, clicking and processing and reporting and doing things. So my experience for sure is that when you bring these folks kind of on board, you have a better outcome. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
Probably because I'm flashing up all these random comments on
the screen.
Okay. Sorry, there's so many good comments coming in. I wasn't trying to distract you. I was just sort of showing them.
You need to have a culture of continuous innovation. I think it's very true, and it takes time to build it, right? And you're not going to go from a 40-year-old legacy organization that hasn't kind of driven change like this to one that's doing quarterly releases overnight. This is a process that takes time and requires upskilling your personnel. Oftentimes bringing in external guidance, right, and folks that can help you build the communication and processes to help you facilitate continuous innovation within your organization. Be that folks like organizational planning leaders, folks that help with digital transformation, sort of guidance and advisory like yourself, Eric. Or personnel and talent management folks as well that might be able to give you advice on how to retool your organization to become more agile.
Yeah, totally agree. Here's a comment from I don't see who it's from, but someone on LinkedIn that says, "Alec, you've changed." I'm not sure if you have a Hepler in the audience, someone that knows you, maybe. I'm not sure.
And then I've definitely changed. I've lost some hair over the years. I'm now a little less tall as a result, and I've learned a lot for sure. So it's I think everybody changes, and I think that's something you asked earlier is like what was maybe something that in my journey has really helped me or allowed for me to be successful in starting a organization and running it quickly is like not staying the same, right? Not being rigid in my ways, trying to, like I mentioned, bring on folks that know more than me so I can learn from them. Yeah. I think likewise, trying to find mentors and other folks out there in the ecosystem or in different ecosystems, folks who are running other businesses, leaders in various industries or facets of life or the world, and speaking with them, learning from them, and trying to improve as an individual along the way. I think I'm glad to have changed. So thanks for calling that out.
Yeah, you had to have, in just a few short years for the company to grow as much as it has. Obviously, you have to have a great team, but you have personally have to change as a leader, and recognizing the types of talent you need and how you manage them and all that good stuff. Here's
deeper than I thought.
Here's a good comment from Callie on LinkedIn. Callie says, Alec is brilliant. Several customers of mine have worked with him in the Bryant Park team. They speak very highly of their experience, consultative approach, and coaching their teams through these digital transformation projects. So you've got there's some fan mail from you there on LinkedIn. So
Thank
nice
you, Cal.
work.
Much appreciated.
Here is a question I want to get to. Going back here for a second. Here's just a comment from Perry on LinkedIn, just sort of building on something you said, Alec. The CXO leadership has to be very clear. I had 2 bad experiences where there was a hidden agenda. So you really have to watch for those politics and internal dynamics that become more apparent as a company gets bigger and grows and that sort of thing. So how do you, I know you talked a lot about commitment and alignment earlier from the executive team. How have you seen politics, internal biases and politics and human imperfections? How have you seen all that stuff affect implementations or potentially derail implementations? And have you seen clients overcome that?
Yeah, it can be very challenging. I think it's very natural for people who have invested, substantial portion of their time in their career to earn sort of the authority or position that they have within an organization. And when an organization is going through a lot of change, those things can kind of be put, and somewhat at risk, or they can move in ways that you maybe haven't predicted. And if you're somebody who's successful, you oftentimes get ahead by being able to control your environment and create predictable outcomes for yourself. And so this can be very stressful. And as a result, I think people can struggle to align their interests with those of others within the organization at times. That could create conflict, and it's tough because those individuals oftentimes both do truly mean the best for their respective portions of the organization, for the organization overall, and it really tends to be the case that there could be sort of differing points of view. Now, when we come into an organization, it's hard to say whether or not some of those things have recently come about. We may see them arise on the course of a project. They may be existing and sort of inculcated into an organization's culture, and those are much more challenging to overcome. But I'd say, in general, the only real way to sort of suss out this type of challenge within an organization is to kind of bring people together, organize leadership, get people on the same page, set standards for what interaction and correspondence needs to look like, create a very transparent, and highly accountable organization. And ultimately, where individuals aren't subscribing to a culture of positivity and alignment with the rest of your leadership team, you need to consider making changes. I think the reality is that these are problems that are sort of irrespective of a transformation, but certainly impact a transformation substantially. You want everybody moving in the same direction, rowing a boat in the same direction. So if you've got potential insurrection within your organization, definitely expect that that's going to be reflected in the outcomes of your ERP transformation, right? Whether that's differing process, over budget, beyond time, right? Wondering why that's happening. Well, you got people who aren't on the same page, right? And I think that's tough. So you got to work pretty proactively to get ahead of that. I would say that, working to resolve some of those things in the lead up to a transformation and trying to, put them on the table and suss them out is key. But I think they happen all the time. Sometimes they happen for good reasons, right? One example that I see is super common is, an organization is growing inorganically, and as a result, they acquire great talent from another organization, and they're forced to reconcile, who does what, right, in the new, combined organization, especially in a world where we're trying to find synergies by running on similar systems, organize processes, realize the benefits of that acquisition by sort of cross-selling and co-selling, et cetera, across lines of business, et cetera, between the acquiree and the acquirer. So in those sorts of circumstances, oftentimes you may have, really capable leaders coming together from different parts of the business. And, again, who are kind of wondering, who continues to, command what, right, in terms of budget, personnel, direction, strategy. So trying to be as clear as possible, like developing very clear accountability and delineated authority is going to be important in those environment so that folks really know what they're responsible for and what they're not responsible for. And then again, trying to foster alignment amongst that team is going to be super key.
Now, a lot of what you've talked about applies not just here in this response, but as you look at everything we talked about so far with, the way we phase a project and some of the incremental changes and the ongoing improvement approach, the executive commitment. We've talked a lot about good best practices for being successful in ERP implementations, regardless of company size. But if we look at the small and mid market, where I know a lot of your customers are, a lot of NetSuite customers and other ERP customers are, is there anything that sort of jumps out as being unique to the small and mid market, or things that are sort of special considerations or unique considerations that they need to think more about than a larger counterpart or a tiny little startup counterpart?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. The mid-market organizations oftentimes that we work with oftentimes have leaner teams within various departments. This often means that the process is maybe less robust, or doesn't need to be as robust, or perhaps can't be more robust, right? Just given constraints regarding personnel. And in those environments, it tends to be the case that the folks that are involved in the transformation process, have a harder time making time for the transformation, because they have a greater level of responsibility overall for running the business. Oftentimes have their hands a little bit more in the business versus spending a majority of their time working on the business. Mm-hmm. And that tends to be the case in the mid-market, right? You don't want to hire big company people and bring them down to a small company and say, hey, go run this department. And they think they could point fingers when they realize they're like a team of two and they actually need to also do said work, right? So in the mid-market, I just think you have a lot more operators who are hands-on, who are running the business, who need to be in the detail, and are also engaging with customers, engaging with suppliers, engaging with internal personnel in a way that can't change. Or is tough to change, or there's really no other way to get it done, so to say. Yeah. And so I see a lot of those constraints play out there, where in a larger organization you have multiple layers within your finance or accounting organization, or within your operations organization, and sort of some of the folks who are running the business or working on the business are already allocating 25-50% of their time to special projects, or these working on the business type operational projects. So I think that in the mid-market, it's just a bit more exacerbated. And so again, some of the things that we talked about earlier, like phasing, reducing the scope, narrowing the scope as you go, those sorts of things, I think become, just even more important. You really got to try and be thoughtful about what your team can consume, and not try to take on such a large amount of work that you can't get through it.
Yeah, and you talked about complexity a lot, and a small mid-market high growth company probably got to that point of success because they weren't overly complex or weren't overly rigid. So it's like, how do you want to preserve some of that? You don't want to just suddenly flip a switch and become super structured, super hierarchical, super complex, all overnight. You want to keep that spirit of what got you to where you are, but at the same time, look for incremental ways you can improve and continue.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we face that in our own business. Hey, why don't we provide this line of, why don't we provide this service to somebody? This customer would love it if we could do that. It's like, well, we don't currently provide that service, or, software vendor is interested in us, supporting their technology or capabilities. So it's like hundreds and hundreds of possibilities. Very easy to have your organization kind of go after lots of different things. You got to stay narrow and focused on what it is that you're really trying to achieve and do well. And, if your team has more than like 2 or 3 goals at once, you're probably taking on too much.
Yeah. Good advice there. And, we can't talk about complexity and implementation without talking about customization. So, and I'd be actually really curious to get your take on this, because for a couple of reasons. One is because you deal with so many different ERP implementations, but also you're dealing with NetSuite, which is a SaaS product, which I don't want to say it's not as flexible as like an on-prem, highly customizable solution, but it kind of is. I mean, NetSuite has more, so call it standard off-the-shelf functionality than a traditional on-prem system. But how do you find companies? How do you advise companies through this whole challenge that we all face in these implementations of wanting to use the software the way it was built versus wanting to customize, to change the software in a way that it wasn't meant to be built?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think just as with any tool or solution you select, um, you know, uh, there's going to be pros and cons to what you use off the shelf versus what you use, what you customize, how you decide to customize, et cetera. Whether to your point, on prem, where you could or a solution that's a perpetual license or open source, you could buy it and make it your own, rip out the base code, and become an engineering shop yourself. Most of our companies in the mid market just don't look at their business as engineering organizations. They're wholesale distributors, they're retailers, they're software companies that are making other products, not their own internal enterprise software. And so, in most cases, they tend to want to lean on something that they know is going to work, right, pretty reliably. Where a lot of the service and infrastructure is not on them. That's sort of a very common way for people to want to operate today. And I think the architecture, at least of NetSuite, and I can't speak to as many of these other ERP platforms. I'm sure they're all kind of trying to pursue a similar framework, because it's sort of the way of operating. It's this metadata architecture, right, where all of the configuration, customization, scripting, workflow type things that you're adding to the platform really reside as data, and these upgrades are really just kind of pointing a new application version at your existing configuration data. And this metadata architecture allows these upgrades to be pretty seamless. But it does say that you're customizing within the sort of framework and tools that are provided to you by that vendor, right? Which certainly does ultimately create, sort of inherently has some restrictive nature to it, right? But I think the reality is that with some of these modern tools, where they make it possible for a mid-market organization to manage a pretty substantial amount of personalization and customization, as does, say, a platform like NetSuite, and sort of seamlessly facilitate upgrades and still be able to innovate over time. So I actually hit my space button there. I think that's going to allow us, allow an organization to be more successful in personalizing the application than probably if they were making changes to a base application. So I'm obviously a bit biased to the SaaS world, Eric, as you know, but and certainly to the NetSuite model. But I've seen a lot of companies' success. We run our business on the platform, and the upgrade process for us biannually is pretty seamless, and we've got I'll say, a pretty highly customized environment. Not that I would recommend that for everybody per se, colloquially speaking, but we've got it doing a lot of interesting things, and we innovate, right? So
Yeah.
Now, with that said, when it comes to customization, really, you do want to kind of, wherever possible, truly evaluate or assess whether or not you can use the out-of-the-box functionality of the platform you're adopting. I mean, it's just to say that you're not even willing to consider would be a very unwise kind of perspective in my point of view. So be open-minded, right? Let's take a look at what they can do, and then let's assess how we run our business today and whether or not we might be able to adopt that with relatively minimal change, some change, a lot of change even, and or if we can use that and tweak it or make small customizations. When we talk internally, we like to say that we want customizations to be minimally invasive if you do them at all. And I like to use the medical analogy. When you realize that there's a gap, the first thing you do is you don't try to similar to when you realize you have an issue, right? Of a sore shoulder, you're going to go first to a doctor. They're probably going to recommend physical therapy, right? Not shoulder replacement, not immediately into surgery, et cetera, right? There's a progression here of care. I think the same thing goes for customization, right? How can you take, say, the base commissions module, like I mentioned earlier, and layer in a couple of additional rules, or maybe a script or small process around it that sort of complements it and allows for you to get the job done while still using 80% of the core functionality, 90% of the core functionality, right? That's definitely a better approach versus wholesale, eliminating and building your own custom module. Also an option. Just know what you're getting yourself into, right? In terms of maintaining it, administering it over time. And you got to ask yourself, is there ROI in pursuing that, right? And versus alternatives, and opportunity costs, et cetera. So it's
Yeah. And I think the good thing with NetSuite and also maybe to a certain degree, Microsoft Dynamics and even Salesforce, NetSuite seems to be evolving and moving towards this model that some other vendors are too, which is you've got a core SaaS product, multi-tenant in the cloud, but then you've got this platform that third-party developers now are creating other solutions, like to either bolt on to the core NetSuite or to provide some sort of variation of the product. And I think that's maybe something that's worth talking about too, is we talk about a lot of times we talk about customization or not. It's sort of
Right.
like either or. We're going to customize, or we're just going to use NetSuite the way it was built, or our ERP the way it was built. But now there's like this third option, which is sort of like, well, what if you don't do either? Or what if you do the standard approach, but then
Right.
you also don't customize necessarily? Maybe there's a third party bolt on or a third party app built on the NetSuite platform or on whatever platform you're using that can provide some of the same benefit without the risk that you take on with pure customization.
Right, absolutely. Like, there's 42,000 or whatever the number, of organizations running NetSuite. If you come across a challenge, you're probably not the first person to have come across that challenge. So the network and ecosystem effect really benefits you as a customer or user. In that same regard, somebody's probably come across that challenge before and possibly solved it. So, there's the lightweight way of going in and finding something in Stack Overflow, or somebody wrote a snippet of code and you can snag it and rip it and get to work and solve a problem pretty quick. The ecosystem benefits you in that way at no cost, but also in many cases you're looking for a robust module. Let's say I see some folks on from one of my favorite suite apps, one that we use internally called Carbon Suite, which is a carbon accounting platform or package that sits on the NetSuite platform, inside of your NetSuite platform, to help you plan and track greenhouse gas emissions, right? And put plans together to become a more sustainable organization. Big priority for us, big priority for their customers as well, and required in many cases. Well, what did they see? They saw that there was a gap, right? Companies were trying to hacking reporting, customizing things to kind of develop this. And here they are now with the suite app that they've developed, and they can deploy to your account in a couple of weeks and get you up and running. So that makes a big difference. And we see that across a lot of areas, and system integrators like us and others, right? Our competitors also go after particular verticals or industries, and in many cases are developing and sort of accumulating kind of packages of anything from, pre-baked, ready to go, to, pre-built code that sort of can be worked from there to get to the last mile to solve problems. But regardless, are developing sort of accelerators, capabilities, intellectual property that really helps companies get a lot of vertical expertise and capability, despite adopting a very broad, ERP that services pretty much any industry with, big horizontal capabilities.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a great discussion and some great threads here. I have two sort of closing questions I want to ask. One is about your thought about the ERP industry looking forward to the future, but I also want to ask you a follow-up question after that about advice you might give to people that want to, that are entrepreneurs that want to do something entrepreneurial in the tech space. So let me start with the ERP implementation angle, though, or the ERP software industry. If you had to predict and put on your, get your crystal ball out, your magic 8-ball or whatever, what do you think the ERP industry looks like in the next 5 to 10 years? What are some of the major changes or trends you're excited about, or you think will emerge over the next few years?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I think the obvious sort of response in this moment is that the rise of sort of artificial intelligence or machine learning driven agents in particular, but just these broader capabilities are pretty exciting and interesting. And we're seeing now real practical use cases that are starting to kind of come to the forefront, be adopted in the enterprise. And that's going to continue. It's obvious that it's going to continue. And so our organization and anybody that's in digital transformation, whether you're internal at a company leading transformation efforts, or a consultant, or in-house at one of these ERP vendors, you need to be thinking about, what is going to change and how that's going to impact, you and your role, and how it impacts your customers, and what we need to be doing to stay ahead of what the user experience, the future is going to be, right? And I think big picture, you'll see, organizations looking to automate process, vis-a-vis agents in a way that may minimize seat growth, right? User count growth in these accounts and in these applications, and instead move towards more, agent-based pricing models. So you can see some of those approaches arising. And I think for organizations that are on the selling or buying side, we need to kind of rationalize what that means for your organization, and be ready to have some of those conversations and think about what that means for how you grow your business. So that's something that's really interesting, and there's a lot yet to be determined. But with our visibility and involvement, both working with customers, working with partners, working with vendors, we see everybody is making substantial investment, and so it's very likely to have a big impact, and continue to have a big impact in the near future.
Yeah.
I think the other piece is the kind of continued um, continued growth of the user base of some of these large vendors, and what the kind of compounding impact of that is, sort of this parabolic, R&D curve, if you will, right? Especially with this unified version. So if you think NetSuite's adding, I'm in the NetSuite ecosystem, so I'm very NetSuite centric in many ways, I think, but the growth is really substantial, right? Almost getting to 1,000 new companies getting up and running on the platform each month. I mean, it's pretty unbelievable.
Yeah.
And when you take into consideration, that number is growing, and all of these organizations are continuing to grow on the platform itself, you could see that the pace of innovation is only going to increase. And the amount of resources that are going into and toward R&D and innovation is just ballooning. And so I think over the next 5 years, we're going to see more and more change and rapid change in terms of capabilities, modules, features, acquisitions of companies that are, these third-party modules like we were talking about earlier, and incorporating them into the core product, et cetera, just as a means to, sort of accelerate the product roadmap and grow, wallet share with the customer. And so I think just it's really awesome to see the momentum, and to feel like you're, a part of it, be riding the wave, so to say, is awesome. And it's really exciting, right? A lot of our customers are getting incredible value, as a user of these systems and technologies. I'm also getting substantial value as a business owner, in this ecosystem. I'm seeing that our business is able to grow more effectively as a result. So I couldn't be more excited about this. I think this consolidation of R&D, especially with some of these big players, is really going to move the needle quickly for companies in terms of capabilities.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. Those are good. That makes a lot of sense. And I could see the industry going that same direction. What about tech entrepreneurs? So a lot of people that follow our content are, aspiring consultants. A lot of them are independent consultants, or people that want to set up their own shingle or their own shop. What advice would you give to aspiring tech entrepreneurs that want to do what you've done and build a company like yours?
Yeah. I like to say that some of the proudest promotions that we've given are when folks decide to leave our organization, start, try to hang up their own shingle. I think it says a lot about our organization and our culture that we invest in people so substantially that they have the capacity to do so. And I want to run an organization, or be a part of an organization that, makes that investment in people, empowers them to get a holistic understanding of the business, so that they could feel that confidence. But with that said, so I do actually help mentor a lot of folks that are, putting up their shingle, so to say. And I having been through that experience, I can definitely resonate with some of the challenges that they may feel on a day-to-day going through it. I think the first thing is prior to going into it, really make sure you know how to sell. When you're an initial founder, you're 1 to 5 people. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that us as sort of technical background folks may struggle with. And a lot of us even have sort of a love-hate relationship with the concept of being in sales, or doing sales, performing sales. I think that the reality is, if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, you need to be able to sell yourself. You need to be able to sell your team. You need to be able to sell your service. And if you're not comfortable and capable or willing to do that, you're really going to straddle or struggle. You have to be prepared to be out there and be in the limelight and be in front. Otherwise, you're just not going to be able to be as successful as you'd like. You can be very technical and hire a sales counterpart. That's also a good strategy. Maybe find a good co-founder who complements you. Would make a big difference. And I've had that on the opposite side with operations, with my co-founder Cassius as an example. And I think we've complemented each other very well. So I would say that's key. Like I mentioned earlier, hiring the best people, hiring people that are better than you, listening to them, taking their advice, empowering them, I think is super key. And then, like I mentioned earlier as well, mentorship. It can be very hard, especially if you're an individual contributor, an independent consultant, like you mentioned. It could be, if you're an independent consultant or a small team, a solopreneur, so to say, it can be very isolating and challenging to find community. And, but the reality is that there's a lot out there. There's a lot of options for you. Lots of folks who are there to help. If you have questions and you need help, more likely than not, when you reach out to folks, you'll find they're pretty helpful and they're willing to lend their time to fellow entrepreneurs. So, I know that I've made that time. I've made time to help others, and will continue to do so. And I think everybody really should. And there's good communities out there, CEO or founder type communities where you can get together with like-minded folks, get into a forum, share ideas, share perspective, learn from one another. And then, of course, I would recommend reading. You can see I've got some bit of a library there behind me. Right. And I think reading and developing yourself is also really important. Don't be so caught up in the day-to-day of running your business that you forget that your performance is critical to your organization's success. And certainly I have to have these like gut check realizations with myself every 3 to 6 months, oftentimes brought on by some of my team sharing feedback with me. Says, hey, you really need to look inside and figure out how to, improve yourself, right, in some regard. And so I think that's key. And it's helpful to have people that keep you in check, and to have that open communication as well. So yeah, find mentors, surround yourself with people that can help you, surround yourself with people that are sharper than you, and the journey definitely gets a lot easier.
Yeah, it's great advice. Well, I appreciate you sharing not only your knowledge about entrepreneurship, but obviously your knowledge about ERP implementations too. So really appreciate having you here today, Alex. So thank you for being here.
Thanks, Eric, and appreciate the time and all the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you to the audience for being here. Again, this is the live production of Transformation Ground Control. So you'll see this episode featuring this interview. We'll edit it a bit. We'll add some additional content. It'll be released, I think, 2 weeks from tomorrow. So check out transformationgroundcontrol.com. Every Wednesday, there's new episodes. And you can also go watch all the past episodes as well. So keep an eye out for this one that'll be dropping soon once the episode's complete. And thank you all for being here for the great questions. I really appreciate it. Again, I'm Eric Kimberling, CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent and tech agnostic consulting firm that helps clients choose and implement the right ERP software for their organizations. You can learn more about us by going to thirdstage-consulting.com. I want to thank you all for being here today. Thank you to our guest and our audience here again today, and hope you all have a great week.